In the sleepy suburb of Pine Grove, where the wild brushes against civilization, a deadly showdown was brewing in the shadows. Clara Bennett, a gentle soul tending to lost strays, never imagined that Willow, a mysterious pregnant bobcat, would drag her into a heart-pounding clash. Lurking beneath the pines, a colossal, ruthless outsider, a predator far from its native lands, had set its sights on Willow. As the afternoon sun faded, desperate cries shattered the silence. Would death claim the mother and her unborn kits, or would an astonishing twist defy nature itself? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Thank you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Grove, a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. The area was known for its dense pine forests that bordered the carefully manicured lawns, creating a unique blend of wilderness and civilization. It was here that Clara Bennett, a 42-year-old hospice nurse, had made her home for the past decade. Clara's modest ranch-style house, with its wraparound porch and carefully tended garden, had become something of a sanctuary for the local wildlife. Her colleagues often joked that she ran an unofficial animal welfare center from her backyard. Every morning before her shift at St. Vincent's Hospital, she would leave out fresh water and carefully portion food for the neighborhood strays, both feline and canine, that had come to rely on her kindness. It was during one of these morning routines in early March that Clara first noticed the pregnant bobcat. Unlike the usual strays, this one had a distinctive grace about her, moving with the quiet confidence of a wild creature that had somehow found itself drawn to the edges of human habitation. The bobcat's tawny fur was marked with beautiful black spots, and despite her swollen belly, she maintained an athletic build that spoke of her predatory nature. Clara, with her years of experience handling strays, knew better than to approach the wild animal directly. Instead, she began leaving out fresh water and small portions of raw chicken at the edge of her property, where the suburban landscape merged with the pine forest. She named the bobcat Willow after the wildflowers that grew in abundance around her property. "You're welcome here, sweet girl," Clara would whisper from her porch, watching as Willow cautiously approached the offerings each morning. "Just keep your distance, and we'll get along just fine." Across the street lived Ryan Calloway, a 45-year-old former military pilot who had retreated into a self-imposed isolation following the loss of his son Ethan in a car accident 2 years ago. The tragedy had not only claimed his child, but had also led to the dissolution of his marriage. Now Ryan's only companion was Bruno, a 4-year-old German shepherd who had been Ethan's beloved pet. Ryan's property, unlike Clara's well-tended garden, showed signs of neglect. The grass had grown somewhat wild, and the flowers that his ex-wife had planted were now overcome by weeds. He spent most of his days inside, working remotely as a flight simulator instructor for a private aviation company. The only times he ventured out were for Bruno's walks, which he took at odd hours to avoid running into neighbors. From his home office window, Ryan had observed Clara's morning ritual with mild curiosity. He'd noticed the bobcat too, but unlike his neighbor's concerned interest, he viewed the wild animal's presence with military pragmatism, another potential problem in an already complicated world. "Keep your distance, Bruno," he would warn his dog whenever they spotted Willow during their pre-dawn walks. Bruno, despite his training and natural curiosity, seemed to understand the gravity in his master's voice and would obediently stay close. As March progressed, Clara noticed subtle changes in Willow's behavior. The bobcat began appearing more frequently, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, and would often rest in the shade of the large pine trees that bordered Clara's property. Her movements had become more labored, and Clara suspected the birth was approaching. "She's choosing to stay close," Clara mentioned to Jessica, her colleague at the hospital during their lunch break. "I'm worried about her." Wild animals usually avoid human contact, especially when they're about to give birth. "Maybe she senses that you're safe," Jessica suggested, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Animals have good instincts about these things. What neither Clara nor Willow could have anticipated was the other presence that had been drawn to the area. a massive Burmese python that had likely escaped or been released by an irresponsible exotic pet owner. These invasive snakes had become an increasing problem in Florida, though they were rarely seen this far north. The python had been surviving in the pine forest, growing to an impressive length of nearly 15 feet. It had been sustaining itself on the local wildlife, and Willow's regular appearances had not gone unnoticed by the opportunistic predator. The attack came on a warm Saturday afternoon in late March. Clara had just returned from her morning shift and was about to check on Willow's feeding station when she heard an unusual commotion from the edge of her property. The sound was unlike anything she'd heard before, a mix of desperate yowls and the rustle of underbrush. What she saw when she rounded the corner of her house made her blood run cold. The massive python had somehow managed to ambush Willow, its powerful coils wrapped around the bobcat's body. Willow was fighting desperately, but her pregnant condition had made her vulnerable, and the python's grip was relentless. "Oh God, no." Clara's cry pierced the quiet afternoon air. She looked around frantically for something, anything she could use to help, but the sight of the massive snake had frozen her in place. Her medical training, which had prepared her for all manner of human emergencies, seemed useless in the face of this wild confrontation. Across the street, Bruno's acute hearing picked up both Clara's cry and the sounds of the struggle. The German Shepherd's aggressive barking drew Ryan away from his computer screen, where he'd been reviewing flight patterns with a student. "I'm sorry, I need to check something," Ryan told his student hurriedly, muting his microphone. Bruno's barking had taken on an urgency he'd never heard before, and years of military training had taught him to trust an animal's instincts. Ryan was about to investigate when his phone rang. It was Clara's number. They'd exchanged contact information months ago during a neighborhood watch meeting, though they'd barely spoken since. "Ryan, please, I need help." Clara's voice was trembling. "There's a python attacking a bobcat in my yard. I don't know what to do." The urgency in her voice triggered something in Ryan, the same instinct that had served him well during his military service. Without hesitation, he grabbed his work gloves from the garage and rushed across the street, Bruno following closely at his heels. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The python had tightened its grip on Willow, who was still fighting but showing signs of exhaustion. Clara stood a few feet away, tears streaming down her face as she watched helplessly. Ryan's military training kicked in immediately. He assessed the situation with the same clarity he'd used during combat missions. The python's head was visible, and its attention was focused entirely on subduing Willow. This was their advantage. "Bruno, stay," Ryan commanded sharply, and the German Shepherd immediately held his position, though his body remained tense and ready. Ryan quickly scanned the ground and spotted a fallen pine branch about 4 feet long, sturdy enough to serve as a lever. "Clara, I need you to be ready," Ryan called out, his voice steady and authoritative. "When I give the signal, you'll need to pull the bobcat free. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, wiping tears from her face. Despite her fear, she moved closer, ready to act. Ryan approached the entangled animals carefully, branch in hand. "Bruno, bark," he commanded, and the German Shepherd immediately began a series of sharp, aggressive barks that caught the python's attention. The snake's head turned slightly toward the new threat, its coils loosening fractionally. That was all Ryan needed. In one swift motion, he wedged the branch between the python's coils and Willow's body, using it as a lever to create space. "Now, Clara." Clara darted forward and grabbed Willow's front legs, pulling with all her strength. The pregnant bobcat, sensing the opportunity, used her remaining energy to writhe free of the python's loosened grip. As soon as Willow was clear, Ryan dropped the branch and backed away quickly, calling Bruno to his side. The python, realizing its prey had escaped, began to retreat into the underbrush. Ryan and Clara watched as the massive snake disappeared into the pine forest, their hearts racing from the encounter. Willow had collapsed a few feet away, her breathing labored but steady. Despite the ordeal, she made no attempt to flee, perhaps too exhausted or recognizing that these humans had helped her. "She needs help," Clara said, her nurse's instincts taking over as she examined Willow from a safe distance. The python may have injured her, and she's so close to giving birth. Ryan surprised himself by speaking up. "My garage is empty and climate controlled. We could set up a safe space for her there." The words came out before he could really think about what he was offering, but seeing Clara's grateful smile made him realize he didn't want to take them back. What followed was a carefully orchestrated rescue operation. Ryan retrieved a large dog crate from his garage while Clara called a local wildlife veterinarian she knew through the hospital. Together, they managed to guide the exhausted Bobcat into the crate using gentle movements and soft voices. Dr. Olivia Rodriguez, the wildlife vet, arrived within the hour. After a careful examination, she confirmed that while Willow was bruised and exhausted, there were no serious injuries. However, the stress of the attack had triggered early labor. "She's going to give birth very soon, doctor," Rodriguez announced. "Moving her to a wildlife center now would be too risky. The best thing we can do is provide a quiet, safe space and monitor her progress." Ryan's garage was transformed into a makeshift maternity ward. They created a separate area using privacy screens, equipped with soft blankets and a shallow water dish. Dr. Rodriguez showed them how to monitor Willow's condition from a safe distance, using a baby monitor with a camera. That evening, as they waited for signs of labor, Ryan and Clara sat on his front porch, watching the sun set over the pine forest. Bruno lay at their feet, alert but relaxed. "I haven't used that military training in years," Ryan said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Never thought I'd need it in suburban Florida." Clara turned to look at him, really seeing him for the first time. The lines of grief on his face seemed softer in the evening light. "I'm glad you were here," she said simply. "I couldn't have helped her alone." Ryan nodded, then surprised himself by continuing. "After Ethan died, after the divorce, I thought keeping to myself was easier, safer." He patted Bruno's head absently. "Ethan loved this dog so much. Sometimes it's hard to even look at Bruno without seeing my son's face." Clara's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. "Grief has a way of making us build walls," she said softly. "But sometimes life finds ways to break them down." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the baby monitor. Willow had begun to show signs of active labor. The next 12 hours were intense but amazing. Under Dr. Rodriguez's guidance, they watched via the monitor as Willow gave birth to 5 tiny Bobcat kittens. Each arrival was celebrated quietly from the safety of Ryan's living room, where they had set up a monitoring station. 5 little fighters, Dr. Rodriguez announced proudly after the last kitten was born. "Mom and babies all look healthy, but the next 48 hours will be crucial." Those 48 hours turned into weeks as Clara and Ryan worked together to care for their unusual guests. They developed a routine. Clara would check on the family before and after her hospital shifts, while Ryan monitored them during the day between his flight simulation classes. Bruno proved to be an excellent guardian, his presence somehow reassuring to Willow rather than threatening. The garage became a meeting point for them, where they would quietly observe the growing family and talk. Ryan found himself sharing stories about Ethan, happy memories he had locked away in his grief. Clara spoke about her own loss, her mother's long battle with cancer that had inspired her to become a hospice nurse. The Bobcat kittens grew quickly, their spots becoming more distinct as they began to explore their enclosed world. Each developed a unique personality. The boldest one they nicknamed Dash, who was always the first to try new things. The smallest they called Milo, who made up for his size with determination. 2 sisters they named Ivy and Nova for their tendency to be most active at night. And finally, the most cautious one they called Ember, who seemed to think carefully before every move. As the kittens grew stronger, Dr. Rodriguez began preparing for their eventual release. "They're wild animals," she reminded Ryan and Clara. "The best thing we can do is ensure they return to their natural habitat." The wildlife vet had contacted a nature preserve about 50 miles north of Jacksonville. The preserve had a protected area perfect for bobcats, far from human development, and with plenty of natural prey. The day of release came sooner than any of them expected. On a clear morning in late April, they carefully loaded Willow and her kittens into special transportation crates. The preserve's rangers had selected a remote area near a stream with plenty of coverage and natural denning sites. Ryan and Clara watched together as the rangers opened the crates one by one. The kittens bounded out, their spotted coats blending perfectly with the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. Willow emerged last, surveying her new territory with alert eyes. She paused for a moment, looking back at the humans who had helped her, then disappeared into the underbrush after her kittens. On the drive back to Pine Grove, Ryan reached over and took Clara's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For calling me that day. For helping me remember that life. Life goes on, that it's okay to care again." Clara squeezed his hand, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. "Thank you for being there when I needed help, for opening your home and your heart." In the months that followed, Ryan's garage returned to normal, but other changes remained. His lawn was now as well tended as Clara's, and they often worked in their gardens together. Bruno had a new spring in his step, especially during his walks with both Ryan and Clara. The python was eventually caught by wildlife authorities and relocated to a sanctuary, but its brief appearance had set in motion changes that continued to ripple through their lives. 1 year later, Ryan and Clara stood on his front porch, watching another sunset. They had just returned from visiting the preserve, where the rangers reported occasional sightings of a bobcat family thriving in their new territory. "Life has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time," Clara mused, leaning against Ryan's shoulder. "Even if it takes a pregnant bobcat and a python to make it happen," Ryan added with a smile, wrapping an arm around her. Bruno lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws as he watched the darkening yard. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its evening song carrying across the pine forest that had brought them all together. The story of Willow and her kittens became something of a legend in Pine Grove. Clara continued to care for the neighborhood strays, but now she had help. Ryan's garage, though no longer a bobcat nursery, had become a workshop where he built feeding stations and shelter boxes for local wildlife, which Clara distributed to other animal lovers in the community. They kept the baby monitor as a reminder, though it now sat on a shelf alongside framed photos of Willow and her kittens. Next to these was a picture of Ethan with Bruno as a puppy, no longer hidden away, but celebrated as part of their shared story. Sometimes on quiet evenings, they would walk to the edge of the pine forest with Bruno, remembering the day when nature's drama had brought them together. They never saw another python, but occasionally they would glimpse a bobcat in the distance. Probably not Willow, but it always made them smile to think of her and her family thriving in their wild home. From a terrifying python attack in the quiet suburb of Pine Grove, we've seen friendship blossom, old wounds mend, and a bobcat family reclaim their chance to thrive in the vast wilderness. But this isn't the end. There's so much more wonder waiting for you. If you're hooked on thrilling twists, heartfelt moments, and profound lessons from nature, hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel today. Every week we bring you fresh stories, untold mysteries, and inspiring journeys to dive into. Don't miss out. Join our community of nature lovers, and together let's